In the thin air above the clouds, the empire moved at a human pace. No horses, no wheels, only breath. Across 20,000 miles of stone and slope, 8,000 Incan runners carried messages faster than any army could march. They linked mountaintop to valley, ocean to capital, weaving an empire through motion alone. Each man waited inside a hut of sun-baked stone, his eyes fixed on the horizon, his lungs trained for the impossible. When the call came, he ran. Barefoot, high above the world, a carved baton clutched in his hand like a heartbeat turned solid. He climbed through ice, plunged through valleys, crossed rope bridges swaying above rivers of mist. At every relay post, another runner was waiting. Before one stopped breathing, another had already begun. The message never slowed. The empire never paused. They called it the Chasquis system, a network of men so disciplined that the sun itself could be outrun. From the Pacific coast to the fortress of Cusco, orders, tribute, and news traveled like lightning made of footsteps. Even the emperor's words reached the edge of the world before nightfall. In a land without wheels, without metal beasts or sails, these runners became the veins of a mountain civilization. They carried not just messages, but the weight of empire, one breath at a time. And that summer, as storms broke against the Andes, their footsteps became the sound of power itself. The Inca did not build their empire on land. They built it in the sky. At altitudes where air thins and voices fade, they carved roads through the clouds. Stone paths clinging to cliffs so sheer that even shadows hesitated to follow. Each road was cut by hand, laid with slabs fitted so tightly that centuries of earthquakes could not break them. They called this network the Capac Yan, the Great Road. It spanned deserts, jungles, volcanoes, and snowfields. 20,000 miles of endurance shaped into geometry. Every few miles stood a tambos, a small outpost built from rock and wind. It was there the runners waited, the Chasquis. They slept lightly, ate little, and lived in silence until the horn sounded. When it did, a message from the capital became movement, and the mountain itself became a road. Each runner carried a quipu, a cord of colored knots. To the untrained eye, it looked like decoration, but to the Inca, it was language. Each knot, each twist of thread recorded numbers, names, and commands. A ledger woven instead of written, a code of empire understood only by those who could read motion. From the high passes above Cusco, the runners could see both oceans in their imagination, the shimmer of Pacific salt to the west, and the endless green of the Amazon to the east. Between them stretched an empire balanced on stone and discipline. Forts and terraces, temples and granaries, all connected by the rhythm of feet against rock. The air was thin enough to turn every breath into labor. But the men who ran here were born in it, their lungs shaped by altitude, their hearts thickened by generations of survival above the snowline. They could cover 100 miles in a single day. To the Inca, that was not legend. It was logistics. Even the emperor, the Sapa Inca, could summon fish from the Pacific to his table in Cusco, caught at dawn, eaten before dusk. It was said that when he spoke, his words reached the border of his realm before his echo faded. From below, the empire seemed impossible. From above, it was inevitable. A civilization built not by conquest alone, but by connection, held together by the sound of running feet and the silence of mountains. As the clouds rolled through the passes, the roads vanished and reappeared like veins pulsing beneath the skin of the earth. And along them, always, the runners moved, small, tireless shadows, carrying the heartbeat of an empire across the sky. The road was not a single path. It was a system, a lattice of stone stretched across the spine of the Andes, connecting peaks, valleys, and worlds that had never touched before. It began near the equator, where green jungles steamed beneath a wall of cloud, and it climbed through thin air until the sky itself seemed to bow. From there it split, one road running along the Pacific edge, another cutting straight through the mountains, each bound together by bridges woven from grass, ropes that creaked in the wind like breathing. Every bridge was rebuilt every year. Entire villages gathered to weave it anew, braid by braid, until the threads spanned canyons wide enough to swallow the sound of their voices. Below, rivers crashed white and furious, but above, men crossed barefoot, steady, unhurried, their shadows moving over the abyss like migrating birds. The road never rested. It passed through climates the world called impossible. Ice at dawn, heat by noon, rain before dusk. It crossed deserts of salt that blazed white under the sun, then wound upward through forests where moss hung like old cloth. Every turn was measured, every incline carved to guide not horses or wheels, but human endurance. Markers stood along the way, tall stones carved with nothing more than distance. They said nothing of kings, battles, or gods. Only the number of footsteps to the next horizon. That was the language of empire. The only monument that mattered was the road itself. And always the wind followed them. It scraped across the plateaus, howled through the ravines, and sang against the chords of the bridges like an endless hymn. It carried the dust of 1,000 feet, the breath of runners, and the faint scent of coca leaves crushed between teeth. It was the empire's voice, not loud, but constant. At night, the road glowed faintly under the moon. The quartz in the stones caught the light. A pale thread stretched through black mountains. Some said the gods could follow it from the stars. Others said the road itself was alive, that it remembered every runner who had fallen, every cry that vanished into the wind. But the men who ran it did not pray. They ran. Each step a message, each mile a promise that the world above the clouds belonged to those who could endure it. And when the wind shifted, the road answered, a living pulse across the spine of the earth, moving, whispering, forever binding mountains to men. Somewhere along the road, a runner began to move. He didn't speak. He didn't look back. He only ran. The baton in his hand was small, a carved stick wrapped with knotted cords, the quipus of command. To him, it was not a message. It was weight, and he was its rhythm. From valley to plateau, he climbed through layers of weather. Rain turned to ice, ice to dust, dust to nothing but breath. Behind him, the wind erased his footprints. Ahead of him, another runner waited, listening for a sound that had crossed 100 miles of air. When the footsteps came, he didn't wait for words. He turned and began to run. The baton passed between them like the passing of light, instant, weightless, unstoppable. The message continued, unbroken across a continent of stone. It could have been a call to arms. It could have been the emperor's decree. It could have been nothing more than a count of grain or gold. The Chasquis never asked. He was not a messenger. He was the message. Each man carried only what the last had given him, the cord, the breath, the direction. He knew the distance not by miles but by the taste of the air, the incline of the path, the feel of the wind against his skin. They moved faster than memory. At dusk, a relay began in the south. By dawn, it reached the imperial court in Cusco, the runners' shadows overlapping like a single heartbeat stretched across the Andes. In the cold archives of the temples, priests recorded the arrivals, the times, the routes, the men who never stopped. Some were noted once and never again, a name carried into the mountains and never returned. The empire continued. The message continued. The runners were replaced, but the rhythm remained. Even the gods, carved into the walls of temples, were said to envy them. They crossed worlds without wings, spoke to kings without words, and bound 1,000 peaks into one. The empire itself became their echo, a living map of endurance, drawn not with ink but with breath. And when the wind rose over the ridges, it carried their sound, a faint, steady pulse, the earth remembering motion. They called it the relay of the sun. For as long as the empire stood, the message never stopped. And in the thin air above the Andes, neither did the men. The empire did not rise with armies. It rose with rhythm. Every dawn, across 1,000 miles of mountains, the same sound returned, bare feet against stone. One runner began, then another, and another, until the land itself seemed to breathe. From the capital at Cusco, messages pulsed outward like veins from a heart. Orders to governors, tithes of maize and gold, records of births, deaths, and storms. Each note carried by a man who never stopped moving. In the Andes, the body was both tool and map. The lungs of the runners knew altitude better than words. Their hearts beat in patterns tuned to the empire's geography, slow at sea level, quick in the high passes, steady through exhaustion. They did not conquer the mountain. They synchronized with it. To the north, the road reached Quito. To the south, it touched the salt plains of Bolivia. At its center, Cusco glowed like a furnace of order. Temples aligned with solstice light, priests counting time by the flicker of the sun across gold. From those heights, every road was visible in the imagination, each a living artery of purpose. Grain moved one way, silver the other. Men ran both directions, their paths crossing in silence, their eyes never meeting. Each knew his place in the pattern, a pulse that bound deserts, jungles, and glaciers into a single body. When one runner fell, another began. When one message ended, another started. The empire did not stop to rest or mourn. It moved as if driven by something deeper than command, a collective momentum that even death could not interrupt. And all along those roads, the world seemed to listen. Birds circled the cliffs, llamas watched from the slopes, and the wind carried the scent of coca and stone. It was said that if one stood long enough beside the road, they could hear it, a faint, rhythmic whisper, the empire's own heartbeat traveling through the Andes. The Inca believed their roads were sacred, not because of where they led, but because of what they carried: continuity. The promise that no message, no life, no empire truly ends while motion remains. As dusk fell over the mountains, the sound of feet faded into wind. But somewhere beyond the ridge, the rhythm continued, a pulse of endurance, repeating through time, binding empire to eternity. The Inca understood something the world below them did not. That distance was not measured in miles, but in time. On the Capacñan, time collapsed. Messages crossed mountains before shadows changed. News from the northern frontier could reach Cusco faster than a bird's flight. To the Inca, this was not magic. It was system. An empire made efficient by motion. Every relay station knew its place. Every runner knew the interval. Even silence was scheduled. At any given moment, somewhere between the deserts of Nazca and the snows of Quito, someone was running. That was how the empire existed, not as land, but as continuity. From a distance, the road seemed still. Only the wind moved, whispering across the stones. But those who listened closely could hear it, a pulse too faint for ears, too constant for rest. At its height, the relay connected 10 million people. A message that began in the mountains could end in the jungle or at the sea. Gold from the coast, salt from the plains, quinoa from the valleys. Each traveled the same veins of stone. In a single day, a command could cross 1,000 miles. The empire no longer feared distance. It erased it, but such precision came at a cost. Every runner was a piece of the machine, replaceable, invisible. When one fell, another stepped forward. When one line broke, another was built beside it. The rhythm never faltered, until one day it did. When the Spanish arrived, they could not understand what they were seeing. Roads without wheels, bridges without iron, messages carried by men faster than horses. They saw power in gold, but the real power had already passed by. In footsteps they could not hear. In systems they could not read. The relay still ran, even as ships appeared on distant shores. The messages still crossed the mountains, even as their meaning began to fade. And when the last runners fell, they carried something greater than words, the proof that endurance itself can defy conquest. Long after the empire was gone, the roads remained, carved into cliffs, buried under moss, still leading nowhere and everywhere at once. They no longer carried messages, only wind, but even the wind remembered the route. From above, the patterns still looked alive, lines etched across the Andes like veins beneath ancient skin. An empire that had collapsed not in war, but in silence. Its heartbeat still echoing, fainter with each century, but never gone. For the Inca, distance had been conquered once. It had been folded into the rhythm of men and stone. And though the runners vanished, the rhythm did not. It became the mountain's memory. The sound of feet turned into wind. The pulse of empire turned into time itself. At the end of the road, the land broke open into water. The runners reached the Pacific. There was nowhere else to go. They stood at the edge of the Amite, the mountains behind them dissolving into cloud, the ocean ahead. Vast, silver, endless. The last step was not a victory. It was a release. The message they carried was long gone, its meaning absorbed by distance. But the act itself, the motion, the breath, the endurance, remained. When they knelt to fill their hands with seawater, the tide washed over their arms like memory. It had taken one unbroken relay to move a thought from the roof of the world to the edge of the earth. No flag, no army, no script had ever done the same. In the centuries that followed, the roads faded under moss. Bridges fell, villages turned to dust, and the wind reclaimed the mountain passes. But from above, the pattern endured. Each scar of stone still pointed west, still tracing the journey of breath through empire. When explorers stumbled upon those roads, they thought them too precise to be human. They could not imagine hands shaping such geometry through silence, nor lungs surviving such height. Yet they were built by men who ran until the horizon itself gave way. Even today, in the high valleys of Peru and Bolivia, herders still follow parts of the old road. Their footsteps fall where the Chasquis once ran, each echo folded into the next. The sound is faint now, carried in the thin wind between peaks, a heartbeat stretched across time. The empire has been gone for 500 years, but the message still moves, not in chords or stones or breath, but in what it proved. That distance can be conquered, and that motion, pure, human, and unending, can outlast power. The Incas are silent. Their gods are gone. But in the spine of the Andes, where the world meets the sky, their breath still lingers. It waits in the wind, and if you listen long enough, you can still hear it, the sound of endurance carried to the sea. The story of how 8,000 runners bound a 20,000-mile empire, not with armies, but with motion. If history still moves you, subscribe for the next true story that should have been impossible. Watch our last episode, how 700 Viking seafarers raided 3,000 miles up Europe's rivers in one endless summer. And tell us, what's the most extraordinary journey you've ever taken?